the food stamp thing. So I grew up on food stamps.
I know sometimes like it's a generational thing. You get older, and it's like back in my day, but straight up, the fact that there's an EBT card now, there's no way you're ever going to convince me that's not exponentially better than having, right? Because food stamps do not look like money. But when you got to go in the wallet and pick out, 4 brown ones,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, there's no mistaking what that is. I could try and fold it in half and pass it. It does not look like, U.S. currency.
Peace, and welcome back to another installment of Cook on Monday Morning. I have pretty much the most accomplished executive director in the history of nonprofits on today's podcast. This young brother is not only doing great things with the Hidden Genius Project, he also has a whole other career before that as a professional academic. He has a great story, a great upbringing, and he's doing fantastic work, ushering an entire generation of Black men into the tech field. Dr. Brandon Nicholson. What's Gucci? Good morning.
If I'm the most accomplished executive director in the space, then either something seriously wrong with the space or we got to call the rest of the space something else. But I'm glad to be here. And, I'm a reader. Sometimes I read more than I listen. I read the newsletter just about every week. And then the podcast I kind of listen to based on who's on there, because I know you had Alec on and some folks. But no, I'm just glad I finally made it, Monday morning, I'm ready to give it a shot. See if I can make it happen. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about Hidden Genius Project. What is Hidden Genius Project?
Hey, look, the Hidden Genius Project. Our mission is to train and mentor Black male youth in technology creation, entrepreneurship, and leadership skills to transform their lives and communities. And we were founded in 2012 by, some buddies of mine. The 2 principal founders were a couple of my good buddies from the Ron Brown Scholar Program. And I always mention that just because we've really based what we've built off the platform that the Ron Brown Scholar Program built with the idea that, you're a scholar for life. So, we've built an intensive program for Black male youth in high school. It's a, cohort-based program that's our core component. And it's really about being a genius for life and trying to support these young people and build a network for them. And Ron Brown's whole, drive was lifelong network for social change. They gave us a lot of money, $40,000 unrestricted, to put towards our higher education. But that was really to incentivize us and entice us to then form networks, form friendship, form bonds, and take on ideas that could really support our community. So I always mention that because this is an outgrowth of that. Had it not been for, from the class of 2000, Jason Young and myself, 2001, and Ty Moore, 2002, but just being able to connect from the Ron Brown Scholar Program, in 2012. In Oakland, when Jason and Ty moved out to Oakland to build their own for-profit company, and said, look, man, we want to pay it forward. We want to do something, different. We want to do something meaningful. We want to engage young people, even as we're building our own for-profit startup. We want to basically do this nonprofit startup at the same time because we don't want to wait on somebody else to do it. And I connected with them just because they knew I was from Oakland. I had a background in education and education policy. They just wanted to see what I thought. And it was just a great opportunity, I thought, for our young people. And so I just wanted to support however I could. And that's 2012. We were volunteer driven for the next 2.5 years. So I didn't come on as staff, as the first staff person until the end of 2014. And, basically, in short, our program is really meant to empower young people, help our young people, especially our Black male youth, achieve their dreams, realize their greatest potential. A lot of people associated with tech because we do rigorous training in technology development, front end, back end, full stack software development, business as well, entrepreneurship, and leadership. And the leadership piece is, I think, really centered on having, a sense of identity. So do a lot of work around identity development, individually and collectively, and then spend a lot of time talking about community and social justice as well. And, that core program is a 15-month program. Now it's but one of the several verticals we have. We started off with just that program, just volunteers driving it, all the funds out of pocket. Our first ever cohort in 2012 was 5 young people. And now, we've got 5 cohorts spanning from Oakland to Richmond and Los Angeles, and then a number of other programs we did all summer and that we'll be doing, all year, I think, even in this virtual context. So really excited about that. And so that means that, having served 5 young people, 2012, when we served those 5 cohorts this summer, that was about 120. But, over the course of the year, we'll serve over 1,000, if not 2,000. Last year, we served over 2,200 young people through all our programming. And we're really excited about that.
That's beautiful. And I know it's primarily high school students. Is that still the case? And,
especially with the cohort program. The other program when we do tends to reach high school, middle school. But now, honestly, we have programs that reaches, young as 5 years old and as old as 80. And what I'll say is it's really been on the shoulders of our alumni from that intensive program, because we've begun to train them as youth educators for the last 4 years, maybe 5 years, and have them actually help facilitate programming in the community. And so that's how we can reach a far broader group, and we're reaching young people, period, across racial and ethnic backgrounds, across gender identity, et cetera.
Nice. Yeah, I want to get into that. I want to dive deeper into the program. I do want to spend some time on your upbringing and how you think about the work. One of the reasons I was making all those compliments and bigging up your success is because seeing you and Hidden Genius gain notoriety over the years, I had a interesting perspective on, because I was doing it alongside you. Like when I was CEO of Mission Bit, I kind of started a Mission Bit a little around the time you went on as full time at Hidden Genius, and the grind. And I was talking to Alec a little bit about this. Like the grind to raise money is is real. And then so I'm trying to get to the next month, and then it's like, oh, Hidden Genius, Google Impact Grant. Oh, Hidden Genius, New York Times article. And then I was like, dang, like, what is Brandon doing? So it was beautiful to see that. And it was beautiful to see an organization like yours get elevated. And I don't want people to think that happened because like that was just like bestowed upon you, like you wasn't grinding, So congratulations on the success of Hidden Genius Project. And there are a lot of people, there are a lot of nonprofits in this area also, like a ton of them.
I've heard that.
Can you talk a little bit about just like how you think about growing the program, what it's like for you to run it? Like what are some lessons that you learned?
Yeah, and for me, I definitely did not want to be, a nonprofit executive director.
What were you doing before?
I was working in the evaluation space. So I was paid to figure out if nonprofits were actually doing what they were supposed to do, if they were effective running, randomized control trial or random assignment studies as they're otherwise known. Doing a lot of work with foundations, government entities, anybody giving out some money, they need to figure out if it was working. That was me. It was really fun. I tended to have the most fun when I was actually kind of doing the collaborative work, and sometimes even like the technical assistance and training and capacity building. So that was kind of like one of the first indicators that I should try it on. My wife kept saying, look, you have all these skills and you're only getting to use but so many of them. But to be a director meant, you had to go into the grind, you had to raise, money, you had to just kind of deal with the everyday, and even, the nonprofit doesn't mean non-revenue. It doesn't mean, non-finishing in the black, right? You have obviously, 9-figure nonprofits, that are a really big deal, here and have been around for generations. Some of them actually are quite new even, right, by comparison. But I think for me, it was really just the calling of this particular work and trusting, having those relationships. I mentioned Jason and Ty in the Ron Brown Scholar Program, and we have kind of 5 core founders: Jason, Ty, Kilimanjaro Robs, Isaac Hayes, and Kirk Collins, and then even Isaac's wife Razmi Hayes, who's just fantastic, great contributor, and so many other folks who contributed to our work. And so a big part of how we got to be here today, how I got to be here, was just, believing in this mission and believing in the work that these other, volunteers were laying down, or recognizing we had the opportunity to build an infrastructure around it, and recognizing, there is a nonprofit industrial complex, for sure, but I was going to try my best to run it like a business, try my best to learn from people doing it really well. Alec Lee being, one of the folks at the platinum standard of this work. Regina Jackson, someone else I put way up there at the East Oakland Youth Development Center, where, I just try and pay a lot of attention to what they do, and take a lot of notes. And I take a lot of notes from a lot of folks, including folks running private businesses. And for me, you talk about the grind and the startup piece. My first hire was an accountant, and it's not lost. I mean, just be transparent. I know that's what you're aiming for on this show. And I'm a Black man, identifying as such for those who may or may not know. And I'm a Black man trying to run a business, run an organization that's trying to pull in, sometimes ask for or earn or whatever it is, a lot of money. Hopefully be a lot of money someday. And like, obviously the thing that you can't do as a Black man running an organization asking for a lot of money is mess up the church's money, as they say, right? So accountant, that was the first thing. Let's run it like a business. Let's be fiscally sound. Let's be on point with that. Even though, everything we do is going to center on the mission, center on our young people. Let's, make sure we're on point, and that we keep the church's money together.
One-on-one advice. If someone wants to start a nonprofit, someone wants to get going. What's your like best few pieces of advice for that person?
Yeah, I think, there's kind of the meta advice. So when, looking at why, for example, I hired the accountant first, I just recognized it was the area in the space where, I was going to have the least energy. I'm actually not scared of it. And I like to think I keep a mean QuickBooks together in partnership with our team. But recognizing that I was getting into this work for the mission, I was getting into this work for the young people, I was getting into this work to be able to innovate, try on new things. So if that's the case, if the last thing I'm thinking about is these receipts and, these monthly financials, I wanted to hire, a firm, and I got a great referral, from just trusted friends and neighbors. But I wanted to hire a firm that lived and breathed this, so they could say, listen, here are the systems we're going to put in place, and that part's going to be okay. So, there are some people I imagine who become the leader or the founder of a nonprofit who are, say, fiscally inclined or whatever. That's their strength. That make sure you get the great hire and the big splash addition in the other area, whatever that area might be, right? Where your level of expertise is not, or where your level of energy is not. Because what we're going to want to do, obviously, is spend as much strategic bandwidth and time then in the area that gets us jumping out of bed each day. So I think that was that one-on-one piece was, make sure the money's straight regardless. But if you're the type of person who's already down to keep the money straight in the whole nine, and maybe it's community engagement, you need a great person who's just all over the grassroots, or maybe it's just someone who can do, the programmatic pieces. And if you're working, say, with young people, who understands young people extremely well, that you love the mission, but you're like, man, I'm just not going to be here in this room with these, young folks. Get that person, right? So make sure you kind of get that balance, right? You want to balance that energy and those strengths really early, so that as an individual and a leader, you can focus on the stuff you do particularly well and the stuff that really excites you every day.
Yeah, that is a lesson that you learn quick, and some people are kind of stubborn around. I've seen in terms of just like other areas of their life or whatever, like know who you are, know who you're not. If you are this type of person, and I do this sometimes too. Like I really wish I was more administrative, and I'm not. Like this podcast wouldn't happen if it wasn't for David, right? Because I like to book the discussions, I like to talk to the people, but like if I had to do all the editing,
right,
it would just live on my computer, So like knowing who you are, knowing who you're not is definitely like a great way to just like keep things going and keep and continuing to build. Let's talk about impact.
Yeah,
because we talked a little about the business and the approach.
Yeah,
what is happening as a result of Hidden Genius Project?
Yeah, and it's, I think, definitely worth noting. You talked to an executive director. We've been talking, better part of 15 plus minutes or what have you, and I haven't been digging into all the impact. The first thing I'm talking about is like the accounting and all the other stuff, and I think the reason why is because at the end of the day,
Well, I asked you about
no, I got you. Oh no, it's not on you. That's on me. I'm saying in terms of, some folks would go straight there, and I think it's important because it's part of how you tell the story. I think for this conversation, the reason why I didn't is just because I think at the end of the day, and you would understand this, we make decisions around the impact we're seeking to achieve. A lot of times, then, as we make those decisions, they're being tested, or we're having to justify them, or sometimes adjust, right? Because we're like applying for a grant, talking to a funder, and it's tricky. It can be a bit precarious because sometimes you get caught leaning and looking, as they say, over at like what a funder is doing or ask for what another organization is doing, and it's like, well, I wanted to measure this thing, but man, like everybody keeps asking like about your college enrollment or about your, number of, folks on free and reduced price lunch or, et cetera, et cetera. And like at the end of the day, like maybe we exist so folks have a great time. Like, and there's, coming from the evaluation space, I recognize a couple of things. One, the working for foundations, working for funders, government, et cetera, even the most like rigorous studies that people ever commission, most of the time, the people funding and commissioning these studies were not reading the results of the studies we're doing before making their next funding decision. So like there are folks who quote unquote geek out over the stuff, but the vast majority do not in the conventional sense, right? What they geek out over is the story. You know what I'm saying? What's the story you can tell? What's their understanding and their perception of the impact? What's their understanding of the relationship? And you spoke to that too, relationships being so important. And so like impact, for us, the big irony for me, like people would say, hey, you're coming from the evaluation space, you're probably going to geek out over the numbers. I'm like, the numbers are fine, but you give me a number, I can make it sound however it needs to. You know what I'm saying? So like we have to understand internally what impact we're seeking. For example, doing this intensive work, getting these young people in retention was going to be huge. You know what I'm saying? Our bet was on just what it means to mentor a young person, especially a young Black boy, a young man at this stage of life. Keeping them for that 15 months is the best shot we have at supporting them 15 years out. You know what I'm saying? Like those first 15, right, is like once we make that commitment, and that doesn't even mean doing all the homework assignments. It doesn't mean making sure they have a 3.8 GPA. It doesn't mean it. Just literally, can we keep them around long enough to recognize that we're there, part of their village, because they're going to gain more clarity, right? As we get older, we get more maturity, more wisdom, and we start getting some more clarity around what we want, how to get there, et cetera. But the gap often becomes resources. So when you look at like our retention has, stayed upwards of 95+%, somewhere between 95 and 98% in our cohorts, right? Which is really important to us. Even if we got to drag you back, if we haven't seen you for 4 days or whatever, we got to call home if we got to go pick you up. We've had guys we had to just go get every single day and drop them off because you're like, no, you're going to do this once you make the commitment. If you don't want to make the commitment, if it's not for you, it's fine. But once you're in, for our intensive immersion program, once you're in, like we're not doing all that. If you had all the answers, you know what I'm saying? If you had everything you needed, you wouldn't have come to us in the first place, right? And we certainly wouldn't exist. So that was the first one. And then certainly just looking at something like high school graduation, because just completing, whether it's for the learning experience, the educational attainment, whether it's for the benchmark of completing something, whether it's for the signaling effect of what completing high school means over all else, it's something we got to get done. And what else do you have to do? Anything you're doing, even at the highest level, you could be, and some of our most talented entrepreneurs have, emerged as such at 15, 16, 17 years old. But when you're at that age, you got a lot of time, right? Like you really do. So you can be doing a whole lot of stuff and still finish high school. Now, if you're going to be a full-time entrepreneur and we're not going to do college or some other post-secondary training, that's fine. Let's talk about it. Let's build a plan. But we got to get you through high school. So our high school graduation rate has been well north of 95% this whole time. And then you have, say, college enrollment, which hasn't been, the end all and be all. It's been a goal or a marker, right, of, folks move on to the next step, but it's not the only one. And by no means is it the only one that matters, right? And so, for us, we've been trying to build infrastructure to keep supporting young people to access post-secondary education, but also then be able to access whatever opportunities they may need to get to their goals and get to the next step. And that even then, our college enrollment, has been north of 95%. So you're talking about now since 2012 for just the intensive immersion program, about 270 odd young men served, right? And so, you apply those percentages to 270 odd young people. And then you have basically another, 6,800 young people we served through all the other programs we've done, ranging in intensity and frequency and duration, et cetera. But, we just start there. And honestly, we've got it those are the three big ones that are driving us every day. Whether there's someone else wants to hear about, for example, the college admission rate, or is it 4-year versus 2-year, we're less concerned with that. When people ask about, well, what about the farm data, free and reduced price meals? We want to have a heterogeneous group. We don't means test because, as it turns out, racism is actually a thing, right? So income, because a lot of times we get caught up in this, and sometimes it's folks from outside the community. So that might mean white folks or people who are not Black, what have you. But sometimes folks inside the community not thinking it all the way through. No disrespect. I'm just saying from the standpoint of people say, well, they're going to make it anyway. So if you want to talk about my story, I got a really peculiar story. I'm at worst, and we always trying to figure out kind of even beyond that, but I'm at worst pretty much a 4th generation college student as a Black man in America. I got 2 Black identifying parents. I got Black identifying blood grandparents, et cetera, right? We know there's a lot of history. I'm clearly light skinned, so we know something happened. But what I'm saying is, I'm 4th generation.
You got the light skin complex too, or you?
Well, no. I'm saying clearly, there's some European influence in here somewhere. I'm very, very happy to be where I'm at. But I say that to say that having been.
No, I was talking about the light skin light skin dudes being sensitive. I
got it. I just went right past it. My God, I appreciate you. But no, I mentioned that because when by the time I'm 14. I'm living with my mom. We're on public assistance. My mother is, at that point, she's got a JD, a legal degree, right? As does my father at that point. But things happen. Systemically, things happen. Other things happen. And here we are. Here I am at the grocery store, using, crumpled up food stamps, to get a snack, right? So you can't tell me that it's not important to build a network, to build opportunity. And what got me through that period was absolutely my relationships, the networks, my family. But whatever wealth we didn't have monetarily, what my mother, my father, everyone had built was, a certain commitment to self-development, self-improvement, and a belief and a connection with our network, with our community. And so we could build from there and we could get better. And so that's what we're trying to do. So, how do you measure that? Well, technically, if you ask the evaluation me, you could do a social network analysis, which is quite expensive if you get any evaluation firm to do it. But at the end of the day, no funder really wants to see a social network analysis. I think they just want to understand how we talk about it. And can we tell a story around what's happening when our program's really working?
I'm glad you started with the story. And I think all of that is a great way to sum up how to effectively communicate about the vision of, I think, any entity. And I want to dive deeper into Brandon Nicholson, so the food stamp thing. So I grew up on food stamps.
Right. Which is, hey, by the way, I know sometimes it's a generational thing. You get older and it's back in my day, but straight up, the fact that there's an EBT card now, there's no way you're ever going to convince me that's not exponentially better than having, right? Because food stamps do not look like money. If you swipe that EBT card, and I can imagine that young people around this country have gotten particularly adept at being swift with the wrist, But when you got to go in the wallet and pick out 4 brown ones. Right. You know what I'm saying? Right. No mistaking what that is. I could try and fold it in half and pass it. It does not look like U.S. currency. So I just have to throw that out there. It was at a time when your stamps, I should say, were quite visible, quite prominent.
The story I was going to bring up was dropping it. I was on the bus on the way to school, and I dropped it on the ground.
Don't do that.
These two kids picked it up, and they was like, "Is this yours?" They weren't talking to me; they were talking to each other. Like, "Is this yours?"
Right.
And it was mine. It was my money for the day.
You needed it.
And, claim it. And I didn't claim it though.
No, you did.
I was just I was so ashamed of having it that I didn't tell them it was mine. So So I get it. The racism is a real thing. People try to slice and dice, or they can try to like undermine or criticize whatever, right? It's like, oh, Mission Bid has all these kids and they're like all Asian boys, right?
Right.
And then it made me be like, well, shit, I'm gonna get more Asian boys in the program just to say,
Right.
like, who says that, somebody can't participate? Or like for Hidden Genius, oh, well, they don't accept Latino boys, or, oh, it's so small, like whatever it is.
Right.
Or the free and reduced lunch, like you brought up, your example, right? Free and reduced lunch. They're going to make it anyway. The task that you're taking on, especially around improving the lives of Black males, you summed it up perfectly. Like, racism is a real thing. So, and I think your focus has been rewarded in the sense that people have rallied around that idea to support your young people, right? Like, these young people are being rewarded in that way, or being supported in that way. You grew up in the Bay, right?
In Oakland, town baby, for sure. Yeah.
Oakland native. Okay. Represent. And
I'm in first generation, right? My parents moved in, or first full generation. My parents moved in from Chicago. That's where they met. But wanted to come to a place that was more diverse. It wasn't as segregated. They loved Chicago, but it was a shade too segregated, and they found some work out here. Shade too segregated, and a shade too cold for a shade too long, right? So they had to leave Chicago and come out this way. And my mom had gone to Berkeley. She grew up, in California, the Bay, Southern California as well. So it's like, I love being from here. I love the fact now that I got a son who was born here as well, and then hope to keep that going a little
bit. Yeah. Are you the only child?
So I grew up an only child, and then, my dad remarried, actually remarried again about 7 years ago or something. So I get almost 6-year-old half brother now.
Okay. Nice.
But yeah, I'm supposed to see him this weekend. But I grew up an only child.
Okay. Talk a little about the neighborhood, the schools you went to.
Man, and I was so fortunate growing up. Even when we ended up on food stamps, my home for most of my life has been somewhere not far from Lake Merritt, either on one side, north of Mandan, through 8th grade until basically 9th grade, and then we had move out, and a lot of things changed, and then south of MacArthur, right behind the Catholic Church, but right off Lakeshore. I've never lived a block farther than a block from Lakeshore, which I love, just because, for as diverse a town as Oakland is, it doesn't get any more diverse than Lake Merritt on the weekend, and that's kind of, I feel like, many ways how I grew up, but was so fortunate just to live in a place, that was, quiet and peaceful every day. I'm really thankful, especially to my parents, one, being born and growing up in Cleveland, Ohio. My mom being born technically in West Virginia, being on our Air Force rad and moving around. And so they had different experiences. They'd seen different things. They wanted me to see more. And, recognizing, again, 4th generation college student, like son of 2, lawyers by training, lots of books in the home. And they didn't want me to be a punk, so they're like, well, you're going to play baseball in West Oakland. You're going to play baseball and basketball in East Oakland. You're going to catch the bus. You're going to catch the bus by yourself. You can catch the bus by yourself with your birth certificates. You're tall for your age, and they're already trying to charge you the adult, prices at 9 and 10 years old. So keep that copy of the certificate on yourself. Make sure that the bus drivers know what's up. And so, like, for me, but the number one thing, even more than about not being a punk, was really that they wanted me to understand that, especially in a place like this, value and wisdom comes from all over. They didn't want me to just think it was coming from the books or just the next door neighbors or just folks who went to this school or did that. That really, you get the game from everybody. You know what I'm saying? You can learn from everybody, and everybody is precious. So you got to look out for everybody. And that was the biggest gift. So I've always felt comfortable, north, south, well, not south, northeast and west here in Oakland. But it was very intentional. They had me go all over. They, wanted me to get in a sticky situation or two, just to understand, learn how to be aware, keep my head on the swivel. And that was a really big part of my growing up. So, I could go home to really quiet, confines just off Lakeshore and not be worrying about a whole lot, in terms of my neighborhood, but just spend a lot of time elsewhere. I went to Magnet Elementary School in Rockridge, pulling from all over the city. I went to Magnet Middle School, again in Rockridge, pulling from all over the city, and other parts of the East Bay, predominantly students of color. And, I learned from kindergarten through 8th grade. I was in Oakland Unified Schools, learning a ton, going with my parents to school board meetings, going to PTA meetings, thinking about, policy and, sitting with like coloring books and Game Boys and whatever, like getting in trouble for fidgeting around because you're at the school board meeting for 3 or 4 hours, right? Wonder when
that's
we
on a
go
good
home.
night, 3 or 4 hours.
I know, when's public comments over, so, but that's the game, like that's what I learned. So I was always thinking, how do you make this better? And I ended up going for high school through a program called A Better Chance, going to Marin Academy.
ABC kid, huh? That was Terrence. Yeah. Terrence was on the podcast from the Aim High.
Yeah.
Go ahead, continue.
Exactly. No, and no, that's right. Marin Academy was one of the Aim High sites for, a time, right? In San Rafael. And that's where I was going. I was commuting every day, sometimes hour and a half, 2 hours a day or more, depending on how I was getting there. And, I just realized when I got there, it didn't take me but a few hours to realize, well, this is a beautiful place. There's a lot of resources. No one here is more deserving, of these resources than anyone back home is deserving of these resources, number one. And number two, in reality, no one here did anything to get this, what I'm saying? People, and it's not popular to say, and as you get older, it becomes less popular because now you're talking about college, your job, your career, like where you get to live. But like, bro, this was like determined by the zip code where we were born. You know what I'm saying? Like even for me, like I said, born with lots of books in the house, folks who had education to help me move and wiggle around no matter where I went. So I was like, what if you can't move and wiggle and shake and hustle? Like, what's your natural birthright with respect to quality access to opportunity and quality access to learning and education? That's how I got so interested in education and education policy, going to, and actually the story, that kind of solidified even before I got to Marin Academy, believe it or not, was, I had been weighing, a better chance and a school in that network, an independent school, with just going to Oakland Tech, public high school in Oakland Unified School District. Love, that's is the school that I knew so many of my friends were going to be going there, et cetera. I went ahead and put in my paperwork to Oakland Tech, even after I'd already applied to A Better Chance. And one day, probably, the week after I put in my paperwork, I'm in like a homeroom class, or, I can remember the room I was in. Unfortunately, we have homeroom and English in that classroom, so I can't be 100% sure, but I definitely got called out of class. That's the most important thing. And, how many education conversations have you had with guests on your show, about Black boys? You're right. So I'm an 8th grader. I'm a Black boy. I just got called out of class. It tends not to go great for us. I'm like, what did I do? Like, I'm racking my brain, taking the long Green Mile walk down the hallway, to the counselor's office, trying to figure out, like, what did I do? But like, I felt like I had a decent day. I didn't talk too much. I didn't, so I get into the office and the counselor's there and the vice principal. And I'm like, oh, come on, and they're like, hey, take a seat, and that's all they say. So I take a seat, I look down, and it's the A Better Chance application on the table, right? The one I actually had already completed. This is a new one, a blank one, of course. And, they said, hey, we saw your paperwork for tech came in, and we were just wondering, have you thought about A Better Chance? We think you've got a lot of potential, and maybe, you should consider this. You've got some schools with some great resources. And so I said, oh, man, thank you. I appreciate it. I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I did apply to A Better Chance, and we're waiting to hear back, and, appreciate it. But, man, as I'm walking back now, taking the it's a much faster walk back now that I know.
Right.
But just thinking, like, it even struck me then at 13 years old, like, man, they said I'm high potential and that they cared about me. So they called me out of class in my 8th grade Oakland Unified School District public school and had me go have this conversation to talk about leaving not just tech, but the district altogether, right? Like the public school system entirely. And I'm like, man, like, how many people didn't get the call down this hall? And like, how many people are still high potential and deserve those opportunities? So that's when, kind of the light was starting to go on for me, like, oh, I need to be doing some work on this to try and figure out how to get folks, more access, so that you don't have to keep calling everybody out of class all the damn time. Like, and I appreciated it. It's not that I was ungrateful, but, it wasn't a scalable solution as we can understand.
Yeah. Where'd you go to college?
Went to college back east at Princeton University in New Jersey, and man, had quickly learned the meaning of old money, new money. I thought I knew what that meant. I thought it meant, like old food stamp, new food stamp. I didn't have a real understanding. Marine Academy was all new money, but Princeton was old money. Princeton was.
Is that how you met Buford? Did you meet Jonathan Buford there or somewhere else?
Yeah, we're basically roommates, suite mates. And
okay. Shout out to Jonathan Buford. Go continue.
That's right. No, my guy. Yeah, we lived on the same hall, met the first day of orientation, and the rest is history. We just two brothers on the same floor trying to figure out where we're going to get our haircut. That was it. That's so close to the friends since 2001, just because as a black man, you just wanted to figure out where to get your haircut. And that's why the Ingenious Project exists. You're creating that network because think about all the things he and I have been able to do together. Like, what could you do if you build a network just based off some of your shared experiences with all this stuff you had different? He was not the fourth generation, to go to college. Biracial family, like, born in Brooklyn, raised in Long Island, very different. But yeah, that was Princeton. It was like all these different people, different places. But being at Marine Academy, I always kind of get irked, when people talk about Marine Academy can be a stifling, whatever. I'm like, if you want to be stifled, go back east, because they did not pretend to care. Like, if you get to stand up at assembly and say how your school is stifling you, which would happen at Marine Academy, like. Bro, like, they did not care. Like, nobody cared. And I don't mean like they weren't good people. I'm just saying it's old money. So when I say they did not care, I just meant if this is the way it is, that's the way it is. Like, we don't talk about it. Now, that didn't mean people didn't have a problem with it. It didn't mean everybody wanted to do it. So, like, I was, like, culture shocked for a full year. I think the thing that got me back together was community service. It took me about a year, but to really dedicate my whole life to service. Black Student Union, Black Men's Awareness Group, Community House, community service organization within Princeton that was doing all this work in Princeton Township, where all the people serving the university were literally on the other side of the tracks, on the other side of the street. A bunch of Black folks from Princeton, as it turns out, and then Trenton as well. And that got me. Then I started to love it because I'm like, okay, I can leverage these resources and build networks and be okay. But it took me a second.
Where'd you do your PhD?
Well, I came home. It was nice to be at Princeton my sophomore year on April 1st of 2003. It snowed, and I was like, you know what? I love the snow in November. I love the snow in December. Snow in January is great. February, okay. March, we're doing our best. Forever, it's gonna snow on April 1st. That's too much. So I said, you know what? When I get up out of here, I'm gonna try and pursue a doctorate degree in education. I'm gonna do it in California. If I got to spend 4 to 5 years doing it, I'm going to do it someplace where I'm really comfortable. And I'll always love to visit the East Coast and other places, but now I can't live that lifestyle trying to do independent and original research. So I came back home, ended up at UC Berkeley. It was a really close selection between UC Berkeley and UCLA. And I ended up going, Cal, which is crazy because I grew up right down the street. And all I saw was a place where they do the protests, a place where we go, I grew up, practicing Buddhist, and so many like people practicing were on campus. So we have meetings over there, or the place where you go get pizza, a place where you get your tie-dye or whatever. I didn't look at it as a campus until I finally got there as a graduate student. I'd had 4 years under my belt. I'm like, oh, it's a beautiful campus. It's a beautiful university. And I loved my time there as well.
Yeah, I wanted to get into the Buddhism and talk a little bit about that. We kind of brushed over how tall you are. Like when you go somewhere, you're always the tallest person. You're like, you're 6'7", right?
I'm probably somewhere between 6'9" and 6'10" if you're actually.
Oh, my bad. no disrespect. I didn't mean to take those 2 inches from you.
I worked hard for those 2, but I can't do nothing with them now. So it's cool.
Okay, 6'9", 6'10". Obviously, very accomplished student. Like, because you have multiple degrees. Were you balancing other activities alongside school, or was school your only focus?
All the time. Are you talking about like high school and leading into it?
Well, college and...
Yeah, everything. I mean, I played sports. I was, student body president in high school. I played, 3 sports, the whole 9, and basketball, while not my first, baseball was my first love, but basketball, kind of became my first sport over time, although it probably should have been track, ironically. But, and thinking, even as I got to Princeton, starting to work on walking on and starting to go to practices and stuff, and but realizing like I have all these things I want to do, and even in the Ivy League, Division I sports, it's a full-time job, and there's nobody's there on scholarship per se, but they can go, they can boogie, they can play. And Princeton's won a lot of championships, and they're not playing around. So they were doing 2-a-day workouts, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours a day of basketball. And I'm like, man, I don't think I could do this and still be great at school, especially if I'm thinking about grad school and the whole nine. So I quit that. But again, kind of the community service organizations, the kind of Black student organizations in undergrad, at college. That carried me. And so when I got to graduate school, I knew, especially getting there at 22, as a fairly young PhD student, I knew I just had to find community right away. So like Black Graduate Student Association, I ended up working for like the graduate student government. I was a student athlete tutor at Cal, and one of the few Black tutors, there were multiple years where I was the only Black tutor in the Athletic Study Center. So the only student athlete tutor that was Black, and a Black man at that. So I got assigned, some of the, top recruits from football in particular, sometimes basketball and other sports. And so everything kept me, but I kept working. I was a resident assistant, or an apartment assistant as it was called, in the graduate housing. So living rent free. So I was holding, easily 3-4 jobs at a time, graduate student researcher, doing policy research with my advisor, and had a fellowship and was funded. So grad school was like the best time. I was making a lot of money. I was eating for free. I was always busy. And I was able to read and get paid to do it on my own schedule.
Buddhism. How did you get introduced to that?
Yeah, I was born into it. My parents, they started practicing in Chicago for right around the time they met. And, something I was born into, particularly practice a school of Buddhism called Nichiren, or Nichiren Daishonin Buddhism. And, part of a lay organization, Soka Gakkai International, and lay organization, meaning there's no clergy. So it's just a bunch of folks. So, for as long as I could remember, my mother and father had leadership responsibilities within the organization. We were hosting meetings at our home, sometimes into the wee hours of the night, and, I was famous as a young child for moving everybody's shoes around, because we'd have 20, 30, 40 people at the house, and take the shoes off. And, I was a shoe organizer for a long time. So it was always around me. And even from a young age, we chant. The core of our practice is chanting, Nam Myo Horenge Kyo. So I was always chanting, but it was actually, I had so many health challenges growing up, and they kind of started to pile up and compound. Eventually, my parents were just like, look, man, like, you can make your own choices. And I'm 5, 6, 7 years old when they're talking to me this way, right? But like, you can make your own choices, but you got a lot going on. Like, we're going to chant for you. We're going to use our Buddhist practice, but you're going to have to do something, because like this lifestyle you got going is not sustainable. You got to find some wins. And so I just started trying to put it to practice, put it to work. And at every stage, any point I've talked to you about something challenging or some hardship, that's been my foundation. That's been my anchor. And I've been able to, overcome and create a lot of value from it. So it's very much a part of my, daily practice, my daily, my identity. And I'm really fortunate to have been able to, just have something I could build on this entire time, especially when things get really weird, and obviously we're in some weird times right now. So it's been super helpful.
Yeah. That's a great segue, because I wanted to get into the times, so we're in quarantine. The time right now is, this is April. This is August 6th. We're post the murder of George Floyd. You run an organization that supports Black boys, Black young men, and a range of other folks like you described. Yeah. School's about to start. Talk a little bit about what the response from your organization was, like how you're thinking about support, how you're thinking about support right now, like for the students.
Yeah, I mean, and to be honest, the most impactful, the most hard-hitting racial injustice that we experienced, where, it kind of shocked us to our core, not shocked us that it existed, but just threw us off balance. Over the last 5 months, right, was COVID-19 aftermath. Mm-hmm. We have curricula around police shooting. You know what I'm saying? Like that's why we didn't release a statement on the same day as Starbucks or Levi's or, the Warriors. Like, we get that Black Lives Matter. I went back and just found the first letter I ever wrote. My introductory letter as executive director that I wrote. I think I probably drafted January 2015. The first line is Black Lives Matter, right? You know what I'm saying? Like at that point, we were responding. You're talking about communities that never quite got over Emmett Till. I was talking to one boy. He said, "I never got over Crispus Attucks." You know what I'm saying? Like just the whole idea of sacrificing, in this country. The other part systemically, we're seeing and supporting young people who are navigating them all the time. But then, the like magnifying glass, right, was COVID-19. And you're like, oh man, like we got guys in our cohort who still, like you said, it's August 6th right now. It's Cook on a Monday morning. You're listening to this, it's August 10th, right? But you're talking about young people who haven't had math since March 11, right? Like that's crazy. That's winter, right? Like, in North America, in the Northern Hemisphere, that was winter of 2020. We're now in summer of 2020, and fall is now, kind of closer, right, than it is far off. And so you're like, man, like, what does it mean that you've got young people going to schools where they just have the resources or like the capacity to teach quality math at the high school level, for 5 months now? What does that mean? What does it mean that, you've got, communities that are disproportionately subject either to be furloughed or laid off, what have you, or disproportionately subject to have to keep working wherever they were working, and how many of our families say, yeah, I'm going to work, you know what I'm saying, during this time, right? And going back several months, yeah, I'm going to work. I got to go in, you know what I'm saying? Meaning they've got to expose themselves, and knowing that's happening more broadly in our communities, thankfully you're able to mobilize resources about how many folks need support, not just with the light bill or with grocery store gift cards, what have you. How many folks were depressed, how many folks are dealing with just feelings of just helplessness, if not hopelessness, right? And we're trying to wrap our arms around those guys and wrap our heads around that. But what I'll say about our team is our team was not deterred by any of this. We did it by hook or by crook. Sometimes it got weird, because we're going through the trauma as well. We're like uncertain, and we have families, and we sometimes have, pre-existing conditions. So, but everybody's like, I know what we can't do is like not be here for these young people. So we shifted to virtual literally the next day. Like, I'm saying, like Monday, March 16th, we knew we probably couldn't go in the office. Like schools had just closed. Every school district by that point, by Friday the 13th, had closed. So we're like, we know we're gonna be at the house. And when shelter in place went into effect, we're like, okay, that's it. We're virtual. And within the next day, we're having our first meetings with alumni of our program. I mentioned we were training those youth educators. So Tuesday morning, started having our first meetings with alumni saying, hey, we're probably gonna need you to work with us from now all the way through summer to help us do things like reduce our class sizes, provide more peer mentoring and cascading mentoring support, help us think through and test out technologies from a youth lens to see if this can actually work, because we want to keep doing this. And that was our commitment. And at first it was our commitment to our immersion cohort that was meeting during the school year and after school, doing that once a week and on some Saturdays. And then it was our commitment to our immersion students who were in summer. Then, our partners were saying, well, hey, we're thinking about doing some virtual components. You normally would be here at our youth center after school every Tuesday and Thursday. Would you still teach, on Zoom? Or, hey, we haven't worked together before, but, the partner we usually work with, it doesn't have the capacity to do any of this. Can you do it? And it's like, okay, and we did it. And it was really, again, our alumni, our youth educators were the difference. We, employed, at least a couple dozen, I imagine. And those were the guys who were just toughing it out every day, because we were still asking our intensive folks this summer to get on Zoom and Slack and Google Classroom 5 hours each day for 6 or 7 weeks out of the summer. And we were grinding. So I'm so appreciative to our team, and it just all came from the same place. There's a lot to figure out. There's a lot where we don't agree or where we just feel kind of traumatized. But, the thing that we all agree on is these young people need us. So let's get busy, let's get active, and wrap our arms around them as soon as we can.
We're about to reach the top of the hour. I have a series of rapid fire questions I want to ask you to close out. But before we do that, I want to hear a little bit about your family. You mentioned your wife and your son.
Yeah.
Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
About them.
I guess the rapid fire responses. I got a wife, Rachel, who doesn't like me that much, but it's fine because my mother didn't like me that much either. I think they always say you go for your mom. They love me. They both love me and keep me in line. And I think they're my biggest supporters, but they just don't like me. But I don't like her that much either. And it's been we've been together 14 years. And I realized from the jump, the first time she, didn't respond to my calls for 2 weeks when I was trying to get her to go out just so she could see if I was serious. That's too much mind games for me, but it turned out to be worth it. We've been together ever since. So I appreciate her. I love her. And then we 3.5 months ago gave birth to our first child, Nico Lee, and that's our son. And really proud to have him and happy. And he's awesome. He's growing extremely fast. He's about 6 inches in. Within 3.5 months, which is quite rapid. He's growing out of everything.
Okay, like his daddy, huh?
Exactly. But he's a really cool guy, really laid back and really sharp. So I'm having fun with him.
Nice. All right, rapid fire. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you meditate?
I do every day.
What's one book you would recommend?
Ooh, that's a tough one. One I just really love. It's heavy, but Devil in the Grove. Devil in the Grove, and I'm blanking on the author. It's a really compelling story about Central Florida and just some really wild times. So Devil in the Grove.
What personal weakness can you forgive in someone?
I think the one I can always forgive, but I may not always just process it well, I think is fear of failure. Because I think so many of us, we want to do well, and especially like in the work I do and the communities I'm in, the degree of difficulty is very high. So sometimes that fear of failure starts to creep in, and I've really have to keep pushing and challenging myself to forgive so that we can push through it and above it and around it and get to the goal.
Do you have a motto?
I probably don't have one. I just jump on a lot of folks. One of the first ones that came to mind, stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
There you go.
There's a lot of great ones. I appreciate all our kind of hip hop mantras, but that's an important one. Yeah.
Well, let's do that. Let's do top five.
Top five.
Top five hip hop artists.
That's Pac has meant a lot for sure. I just love listening to Common. I really do. So I'll put Common in there. I'm trying to figure out like which kind of foundational person you got to put in there. There are some great ones, but like just listening, Rakim is pretty solid. Like I think that's probably like my legacy guy for sure. Just because we're almost the same age, so like I feel like I grew up with Lil Wayne for sure.
Okay.
And then I think there's so many cats around here from Oakland or the Bay, and I gotta show some love. And I feel like, I even like Hyro, even 40 for that matter. But there's so many cats.
There you go. That was 6, but that's dope.
I know.
You did great. Last and final question. Who's going to win the presidential election?
Well, I guess it depends on who's got the best bots, what time is it in Romania right now? Those phones are working. It's probably about time to get, Donald out of there, I think. But, I talked to my grandmother about what it was like to grow up in Central Florida, no less. She's 92 years old, and she was talking about, being born without the vote, as was my mother, right, and my father. And just, there's just been no shortage of shenanigans over the years, electoral shenanigans. It's been really cool to see LeBron James and folks, working on their voter empowerment and voter enfranchisement work in Florida. And this past week, right, they were announcing that LeBron and all these folks who've signed on, they've been paying the restitution down for formerly incarcerated folks who have felonies in the state of Florida, so they can have the right to vote come November. Because, at the end of the day, we need leadership. I grew up, like I said, I went to Princeton at a time. I was talking to somebody the other day. I know it's got to be rapid fire, but
it's okay.
You got to understand, I majored in policy. one of my heavy disciplines within that was politics. Like what conservatism meant was like, okay, it was, there's some about, you might look at a Roe v. Wade, but most frequently you're looking at things like immigration reform or education, allocations, and there's systemic injustice tied to that, systemic racism, but there were compromises, there were conversations, there was, okay, give me 5 of those and I'll give you 5 of these. You know what I'm saying? That's gone out of the window. And is not the least of which is due to the lack of leadership willing to have those conversations, right? I literally, my training in the space was not about having everything you want happen all the time. It was about some of the stuff is going to happen, some of it won't. Find the overlap and find the things you can compromise on in order to get some of the things you need, right? We're not having that conversation. So insofar as the person in the top seat is supposed to be helping facilitate a safe space for that to happen, and insofar as he's not, he's the one who's got to go. And we hope, obviously Joe can do that or whomever it is, but that's the part that's just a trip. Like, we were getting trained. This wasn't 50 years ago. This was 15 years ago. I'm getting trained to think through, analyze, look at information, compromise, confirm, verify. All that is flown out the window.
This is Brandon Nicholson. This is Cook on Monday Morning. Thank you, good brother. I appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you, man. I think I might start up my own podcast just so we keep our conversation coming. You could be my first guest. Be on a Tuesday. You know what I'm saying?
We're taking over the week. Taking the week.
Exactly. I mean, I appreciate you, and I appreciate everything you've been doing. I just love, man, how you show up with such authenticity. You are obviously super curious, but super knowledgeable as well. And you've been an inspiration, man. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Brandon. Peace, and thank you for listening to another episode of Cook on Monday Morning. At Cook on Monday Morning, we are building lives that make us excited about Monday morning. We believe that if we can own Monday morning, we can own the week. If we can own the week, we can own the year. And if we change our year, we can change our lives. I'd like to thank Dr. Brandon Nicholson for sharing his story and the lessons he's learned while building the Hidden Genius Project. He's a good brother, family man, and devoted to his community. We need to come in and celebrate people like him. I hope that you'll support the organization and visit their website, hiddengeniusproject.org. I'd also like to thank you, our listeners, and those that continue to support the Cook on Monday Morning YouTube channel. I'm grateful to all of you for your support. Please share the podcast with a friend. Help us grow this community of doers. Please also take a minute to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you get a chance, please rate and review it on Apple. It's greatly appreciated. If you're interested in starting a podcast, I wrote an article. It's called How to Start a Podcast During a Pandemic. It's very timely. It'll be timely once the pandemic is over too. It goes through all the equipment that we use. I offer some book recommendations. You can read a full article. The full article is in the description box below. Cook on Monday Morning is a product of the Luther Harris Holding Company. We work in partnership to create solutions that drive social impact. We do that by building strategic partnerships between businesses and government. We offer recruitment services for diversity talent and high impact roles. And we help companies drive impact in the communities where they do business. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to send me an email. I am at info@stevoncook.com. Again, thank you to our listeners and to the people that make this podcast possible. Our videographer, David Topete. Thank you, sir. Our copy editors, Fernando and Cinco Marquez and Devin Sketchinger. Thank you both. I get up every morning with the intention to create value and showcase my love to the people that keep our cities moving. You know who you are. You are our teachers, our school lunch workers, custodians, social workers, firefighters, police officers, EMT workers, garbage collectors, bus drivers, and nurses. You are our employers, the folks creating jobs and keeping our economy moving. And you are our gig workers, stocking our shelves, driving our ride shares, delivering our food. To all of you, thank you. This podcast is for you. You live in places like San Francisco, Oakland, Richmond, Antioch, San Mateo, Los Angeles, Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Miami, Orlando, the Carolinas, Virginia Beach, Milwaukee, Kansas City, Cleveland, Detroit, Harlem, Brooklyn. Shout out to all of our listeners also in Nigeria, Ghana, Jamaica, Kenya, and Ethiopia. Thank you to all of you. This podcast is for you. This message is touching the world and will continue to because of you until we meet again. Peace, peace, and we out.